guidance. To ask a question which says, I have two choices, which road should I take? I have two options. I have two things that I'm thinking about. Can you tell me which one I should choose? That is not a real question. It must be understood that there are no correct answers. In order for guidance to be given in this particular domain, there must be heartfelt sincerity. Sincerity is not a must, but if it is not present, there is no point in speaking. General questions about how do you calm the mind? How do I do this? Anything that is prescriptive is not sincere. Therefore, there can be no guidance.
I've heard you say on a couple of occasions that repeated exposure to the truth is what's necessary in order to rewire the brain. And I've experienced that to some level through your work. I've invested in some of your direct truth podcasts, and they've been really helpful in getting a better understanding. Um, my question is for myself, your work is the only place or source for me to expose myself to the truth. Um, what I wanted to know was, where do you go to expose yourself to the truth? Do you visit your own work that you've done in the past to expose yourself, or is there something else that you're immersed in order to expose yourself to that truth on a regular basis?
My exposure comes from the dedication and the devotion to the truth. And because of that dedication and devotion, there seems to be a place that has no name from where it comes. And that source, that well, whatever it may be, and from wherever it arises, that is that is what I consult.
Is devotion, dedication, desire with a capital D, sincerity, is it a choice?
People who are a person who is dedicated to something, it doesn't come through a choice. It usually is something that is visceral and most of the things that are um, truly otherworldly in this lifetime for any human being are generally not the things which they choose, but which choose them. A human being is always chosen when it comes to things of um, purity and devotion and genuineness, sincerity, all of these things.
How do facts tie into the truth?
Words are dangerous because each comes with their own definition as to what is a fact and for what is an opinion and what is a belief and what is truth. Um, Generally, those who look for facts are looking in the material world, they're looking in the um, phenomenal world, in science and literature and research and those kind of things. That's where facts tend to reside. The person who is looking for the truth is not beholden to science. Uh, he he is not beholden to laboratories and research and things that the limited things that a human being fabricates, or even in the limited means through which they discover things in the world. So the truth is much more fundamental and far-reaching than something that is simply a fact.
Can guidance be distinguished from advice?
Once again, these are more words. There's there's no definition to these things.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So, what I have seen is that it's absolutely true that whenever I was sincere, guidance did come to me. but sometimes I ignored it because of, my general sort of suspicion against advice and prescriptions. So I was trying to understand, is there a way where like I can be better at
No, I
kind
don't.
of
I don't think
judging?
that. I don't think that you ignored it because it was a prescription. I think generally when someone tends to ignore advice, um, it's, to be honest, advice should be ignored because it is always prescriptive, and the person seeking it is looking for prescriptions, and the person who's giving it is giving prescriptions. So generally, it's ignored because of ego, and just as it conveniently turns out, advice should be ignored because it is always menial and it is never the truth. And unless something is the truth, it can only lead to more problems. When you are given answers, the answers only lead to more questions. Therefore, it's a circular chase. And human beings spend their entire lives chasing, and they never truly find the thing. And that applies to every single human being. And that isn't because they lack the potential to do so, but it is because they believe in answers. They believe in rights and wrongs. They believe that this is the correct way and that is the incorrect way. Therefore, they seek mentors and read books and listen to spiritual people and listen and follow the path of self help and self development. And it's all complete waste.
Evening, Dr. Gupta.
Hello?
Was curious if there's any place for compassion at all, or does someone have to walk their own journey completely by themselves?
So, the only reason that you know the word compassion is because you came into the society and that word was given to you. And it was given to you as a way of something good. And what society does is it tells you that, okay, these are the good things and these are the bad things. So look for those things and avoid the other things. These things have no meaning. When the, the trouble with society, and this is what human beings don't understand, is that society tries to tell you to chase things that generally come naturally. And all these things that human beings chase, they aren't real things. There's no such thing as compassion. It doesn't exist. Um, when the reason it doesn't exist is because the human being chases it. The human being puts it on the wall and says, this is a good thing to chase. I should become that. And then they turn it into a judgment and say, well, I have not been that. I need to become more of that. And all of a sudden, they look at their life and they see, when they examine the clock and they examine the calendar and they notice that 75 years have gone by and they're still chasing the words. A person who chases compassion will never be compassionate enough. A person who chases love and goodness will never be loving or good enough. Whenever a human being lives and worships at the altar of words and concepts, they are signing a contract for failure.
Is the truth subjective?
No.
Does effective, not that it's good or bad, but does effective guidance require a master outside of prescriptions? Not like hammering a nail, but does artistic, like, guide, is there any such thing? Like I said, had a question in there somewhere.
Well, it would benefit you more to not dress up the question into a summary and ask the raw thing that you want to ask.
Does effective guidance have to come from a master? Like, do I need?
So there's a reason that you're asking that question. So
Does effect?
say, why are you asking that question?
That's a great question. I might come back.
It didn't just come from nowhere.
Right. I guess it comes from you in this moment and having not that you know, but having being able to talk to you and stuff. It feels like you have guidance for me even from asking the question about this, like you're the master in this situation. That's where the question comes from.
I think the masterfulness really lies in the nature and the quality and the depth of the sincerity.
I appreciate
Guidance cannot come from prescriptions, and all that is unfortunately available in society, in the world, in any corner of the world, and in any domain, is prescriptions. And in fact, so much so that to suggest anything other than that would be ludicrous, because it's kind of like going to the ocean and denying water. That is all that people have been subject to, and that is all that human beings know. Therefore, guidance cannot come from the world. Guidance cannot come from society, precisely because it is all founded upon something that is not real. And if something is real, if something is not real, then anything that arises from that foundation is sheathed in unreality.
Right. Would my questions be more sincere if I was more sincere, if that makes sense? I know it's a weird question, but does the sincere person have better questions, like more to the point ones, like ones that, you know?
Sincerity tends to mature over time the more that one is exposed systematically to truth. And so it isn't about chasing sincerity. If the person has the DNA for the truth, to seek the truth, and the more they expose themselves to the truth, the nature of their questions begin to change, because the orientation of their interiority begins to change, and cosmetics, and it tends to move more towards the fundamental nature of things.
I feel a gravitational pull to play societal games. And I feel like I can see a lot of falsehood. But it feels like I have to partake on some level to just, I don't know, get by living in a city. How do I maintain sincerity? How do I?
Well, there's no requirement to leave society and to move into a cave. One certainly may if they wish, but there's no requirement to do so. It is not either or. Um, so the sincerity does not live in society. The sincerity lives within a particular human being. Therefore, living in a society does not preclude one from seeking the truth. In fact, living in a society so easily reveals the falsehoods that in some ways it makes it easier to see truth. So long as one understands through some degree of rigorous understanding, and some degree of exposure to truth on a systematic and continual basis, that all that he sees in the outside world is false. It is entirely false. And that is not an easy thing to see, because it is natural for the human being to believe that, yes, while I see this is false and that is false, how can everything be false? That just cannot be. And that one thought, that one belief, as logical as it may sound, keeps the human being on the hook forever.
Whenever I inquire, who am I understand maybe at an intellectual level,
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. If X person says, "Well, I did it and it worked for me and I transformed," so be it. But you can ask that question all you want, and it's just going to get you to intellectualness. It's all it's going to do. And so I think that's what human beings have to understand. They don't have to force the understanding upon themselves, because that doesn't work. But through some form or fashion, in some way, at some time in their life, the realization has to dawn that all these things, and even what you're saying now, you got from a book, all these things that who am I and spirituality and self-help and uh, they seem to be sacred cows, but they're complete falsehoods. The content itself may not be false, but it being presented as a methodology is completely false. One could say, get into the present. No, that isn't false, but go ahead and try. So to actually say that is, it is simply an unserious person who would say that. And so you have to understand that people just like to talk, do this and do that, and things that sound nice. But no one ever realized, like genuinely achieves or has a complete realization of the very things that they high-mindedly speak about in these spiritual books. No one's enlightened. They just talk nonsense and rubbish. It just sounds nice and it's flowery, and you can put it on Instagram and you can put it on the board and on bumper stickers. But you can ask these things till the cows come home, and at the end of the day, one must examine the evidence for themselves. Are there Buddhas walking around, despite the fact that the Four Noble Truths have been on the shelves for thousands of years? You know, these things don't work, and human beings are continually moving towards them as if they do, and every single one of them fails.
So, if I can ask another question just real quick, that in itself, like understanding that in itself, that it's such a subtle prescription that I'm doing, that my sincerity is basically not authentic.
Well, it isn't that subtle. I mean, it isn't that subtle to do a spiritual prescription. To ask yourself, who am I? Okay, you go ahead. I mean, once again, never believe me. Go ahead and do it. Say, I'm going to do this for 6 months, or a week, or one day. See where it gets you.
Is one of the truths that we are fundamentally always alone? We suffer alone.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
that's a good question, and it is absolutely correct.
But I want financial freedom. But at the same, I know, but at the same time, I'm comfortable right now at my spot. That's the reason I don't have financial freedom. But at the same time, like, there's nothing that you really can't do nothing about it. But at the same time, I really want it, but I don't know. But that's where I kind of get stuck. But I want to get understanding of certain type of questions.
Well, generally, people, when they want, they don't find themselves pursuing it, it's because it would be nice to have, and the desire is not visceral. That's why these things happen.
Are you free?
It is impossible to answer that question because the vessel that you ask to put water in has holes in it. Therefore, you don't have a clear understanding of what freedom is. Therefore, the language with which I answer the question, though it may be English.
Is it possible to sincerely seek guidance without masking a desire for an actual ask for prescription?
Well, I think it's important to understand, and it would be perhaps some degree of relief to understand for some that there should not be any shame in the fact that all that one has in their arsenal is to ask for prescriptions. When that is the only thing that you have ever heard of, and that is the only thing that you've ever been taught, and that is the only language that you've ever been exposed to in your entire life, which is basically everybody, then what else can you possibly ask for other than a prescription? I have clients who I've been working with for years and years, and even they have to stop themselves. Not that they should stop themselves, but they stop themselves because they have recognized after years the futility, despite them having masked in their asking. They have asked questions without using the word how to, so that it wouldn't come across as a prescription, even though it was exactly looking for a prescription. So everyone will do it because that is all they know. And so long as one understands that, then they can move away from any type of hesitancy they have towards it and not ask it, but to recognize that that's why they are where they are is because of the conditioning of society. And having recognized that, this gives them a new beginning to begin to understand the futility of prescriptions and not turn no prescriptions into some rule to follow, but to genuinely look behind it to see why that is the case, as opposed to just making that some ideal to live up to.
May I ask a follow on?
Mm-hmm.
Through various circumstances, I've seen through to an emptiness of pursuit, but I don't have a deep enough understanding, and it feels like a holding pattern, or it's not exactly the right word. I don't see places where I can find an understanding because the language that I would use for this place doesn't seem familiar, and it doesn't seem like there are people in my sphere in any case who, yeah, I don't even mean individuals in my personal life. I don't know the vocabulary to move through this place. Not that it's about words. I'm not sure if I'm expressing myself well.
If you're looking for understanding, you're, it would it would perhaps benefit you to read through all of my work and podcasts and books and whatever you could find, and because all of the things that I write um, are from a place of understanding and non-prescribing, and they aren't good, and they aren't healthy, and it isn't proper, and no, you shouldn't do it. If you feel compelled to, you may, um, but they're prescription free, and therefore the well from which they arise tend to lead the human being back to themselves, back to their true nature. So that exposure, perhaps, I'm not saying that it will, it may perhaps be a benefit to you if um, if understanding is what you truly seek.
You're talking about how consequence is what creates this feeling of fear in us, and how if a player enters, let's say, a golf competition without the desperation to win, then he just plays it to play it, and there's no fear anymore. One thing that I'm sort of conflicted with, like I'm conflicted with that sort of truth versus if the desire to win is so strong, then you would do whatever it takes to win. So those two things seem contradictory to me. So I'm trying to sort of figure that out.
The very fact that one is trying to get away from fear is a problem. The very fact that one is desperately trying to win is also a problem, because both are chases. So things must be seen from a much more fundamental stance, as opposed to the precise topic itself. Look more fundamentally and understand that the things that you're talking about are just details. Fundamentally, they're chases, and it absolutely doesn't mean that you can't win and you can't be free of fear. But if you chase those things, then it does mean that those things will either elude you, or even if you manage to grasp them, they will not last.
So I've noticed that I everything that I am, that I say, that I even think is just borrowed information or borrowed knowledge from somebody else, and that I even do it unconsciously, or I'll even think at a time someone will say something. I think, okay, like I'm not accepting that into, whatever my memory or information. And then I'll notice a couple weeks later, like words coming out of my mouth that were from somebody else. I'm like that, and it bothers me. And I do the same thing with prescriptions. So both information, knowledge, memories, prescriptions. I notice that I take them on unconsciously, and I just notice myself acting them out or saying the same thing. Is it is it possible to hear and to see others or society or things without absorbing them into?
You become whatever you expose yourself to. If you expose yourself to society and you imbibe society and you value society, then you will become society. If you expose yourself to truth and you imbibe truth and you value truth, then you will move in the direction of truth.
Do I hold the truth?
You are able to access the truth, yes. But as the person who you believe yourself to be, given the years upon years upon years upon decades of conditioning and priming and tenderizing that society has put, the car wash that society has put you through, you are not able at this time to access truth in any form. The moment that you try to, your mind will go in the direction of science. Your mind will go in the direction of books and self-help and quotes and spirituality. And it will not help itself. It will not be able to help itself because that is the only world you know. And it will take you years just to get out of that miasma. So the answer to your question is theoretically and potentially, yes. Practically and immediately, no.
You mentioned that earlier, that that like what the human being is devoted for, he's kind of chosen for that. Like in my personal case, I've kind of taken the societal route to find what I'm devoted towards, like in terms of my career path or whatever, and it hasn't really worked that well for me. Is it possible for someone to connect to like what they're truly devoted towards, like seek guidance for that?
Well, not if they ask, what should I do? Or what should I pursue? Or what path or what profession should I go down? Nobody can tell you that. I
Yeah,
mean,
that,
you have, this is not a guidance counselor type of thing.
yeah,
I mean, those things have no meaning.
no, for sure, because that's basically the route I'm trying to shed. Like I've shed in the sense that like I would read into the societal means of like taking a psychology test or to figure out like a Myers-Briggs to see what I'm good for. And I
Yeah,
think,
that's all stupidity.
yeah,
Yeah, all of those things,
yeah,
all of those things they should all come with a warning label on the bottom, which states for entertainment purposes only. It's all nonsense. It's just a joke. Those are all characteristics. Those are all personality traits, and they have nothing to do with getting to the visceral um, nature of a particular human being and what he is genuinely desirous of. Um, there's no test that one can take, um, and that is why a human being must society proof himself if he wishes to look for the truth, if he wishes to not waste time in his life, if he wishes to truly reach his potential as a human being. He will recognize that all of these tests and all of these programs and doctrines and concepts um, and strategies that society has put forth are all a flea market until he looks out his window and sees nothing but neon lights and cardboard and snake oil salesmen. Until that happens, then he will fall for all of those things for years and years and years, and those will obviously be years and years and years which he will never get back.
Could you talk about prescriptions? Are they dangerous for
Prescriptions are
society?
how-tos, methods, techniques, 5-step plans. They do not have any effectiveness whatsoever, and it is the only thing that society is founded upon. That's what prescription means.
My question is, in relevance, it's in relevance to what the title of this room is. How do we know when something is the truth?
There's no test you can take. I mean, if I would say the greatest, perhaps the best way is that if you go to a particular stream and you collect water from the stream, and the water purifies you, and you can tell and you can feel it, and then you go to a different stream and that water makes you sort of sick, and then the place where you go, which does something to you on a visceral level, be it radically changes the way in which you see things, not just for change purposes, but it opens up a world to you that inside of you gives you feelings that you've never had before in the direction of harmony, in the direction of um, sincerity, in the direction of purity. Um, and that tends to be in the direction of truth. So you have to examine your interiority to see what effect did this have upon me? Because the truth, in all truth, is the most powerful force in the universe, and it tends to have a profound effect on human beings. And I think that's what one must monitor and use as their guide.
The question I had was, well, first I want to give kind of a prequel to the question. A quote I recently heard was, the best advice is embodied, and it stayed with me because there was something about that quote that resonated as truth. And when I started meditating on the embodiment of truth, I've reached a lot of blocks. So I wanted to ask if you could explain what the embodiment of truth feels like, looks like for you personally. I would deeply appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some things that are just very difficult to describe, and the words that people use and phrases people use, everyone has their own particular meaning of what those things are, and so they make it's very difficult to communicate through the bridge of words, because words have an extreme limitation in their universality across different people. Um, so, you, it's difficult for you to bring a word and then me jump on the word and say, well, this is what that means. Um, there is what I call devotion, and if a human being is devoted to the truth, then it is not an intellectual affair. It is something deep and visceral within them, that they can't help but to constantly look for the truth in whatever situation they're in, as opposed to trying to find the answer or the correct thing to do or the proper thing or the right thing or whatever the books and the business books say. Those things tend to have no meaning for them. And what they're always looking for is, well, what is the truth? And so that is a visceral devotion. That's a human being whose interiority is directed and is very much aligned towards seeking the truth.
When I discovered your work, I was reading Direct Truth, and I felt a lot of what I was reading in my bones. Like it was different than before. After that, I had a experience of really heightened clarity that lasted about 5 days. Since then, that clarity's decreased quite a bit, and I feel that my devotion to truth is sincere, yet I feel this unknowing or like insecurity since that clarity that I guess had the ability to see has dwindled since that time. And I can see that I had this belief that, there are some moments of clarity that are enough to dissolve that conditioning, of the self, or I guess leave it at conditioning. So my question is, does clarity like kind of come and go as one's sincerity matures, or
Yeah, the more that one's sincerity matures, the more they move towards clarity. But what must be understood is that if one comes to a pure or clean river, uh, and then after that they jump right back into the mud pit, then they're going to get dirty again. So the human being's default state is to live in society. And while it isn't just the living in society, because one can live in society and absolutely seek the truth, but it just so happens that human beings don't just live in society, they inculcate and they imbibe and they believe and they value society. And therefore, um, that exposure begins to take them back towards that realm. So therefore, whatever things that they've experienced before, given their brief exposure to truth, tends to be washed away because of the re-exposure to all of the lies. Society is nothing but lies, and that's what must be understood eventually by at some point by a given human being if they genuinely seek the truth. That must come into their viscera somehow, in some fashion, through some means, through some vehicle, and it must come to stay. And until that happens, the reconditioning and the return to the default societal state is going to be the order of the day.
okay? Do you mind if I ask one more question?
Okay.
Does it? I like what you say as far as kind of reconditioned there. I wanted to use the words that aren't really accurate, but say like or ask, is it kind of painful to go back to that? But painful is not the word. It's just I I do not want to. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to word it. I'm sorry.
Well,
If
there
I
have been
can.
clients who have told me that they'd rather die than go back.
Yes.
Once a human being tastes truth in any field, and whoever they may be, um, then all else pales in comparison. Um, as long as it was a deep felt communion with the truth, and even if it was brief, everything else in an instant becomes black and white, as opposed to that color. So that that tends to be a very common sentiment for those um, who tend to read, I guess, something that I wrote, and I don't like saying that, but I almost feel like apologizing for that. But it that is the experiences that I've had from the feedback that I have received from human beings who have read or heard what I have spoken, and it has done that sort of thing to them, which led them to say, for whatever reason, not that they should, that they would rather die than go back to the old way of living and to the societal ways. And that isn't a good thing or a bad thing. That just happens to be what people say.
How does one like stop having like expectations, right? Because in society with the
Well,
prescriptions.
there's no how to stop doing something. Like there's no, I can't tell you go do 17 jumping jacks and 4 somersaults and you'll stop having expectations. There's no how to. There's how do you raise your eyebrows? I mean, there's no how to. How to is a totally false and anemic societal concept which has no merit. It is valueless. It is a scam and a sham. It is completely superficial and cosmetic. Therefore, um, if one finds themselves having expectations and the expectation is bringing them pain, then they will naturally move towards stopping having expectations if the pain is sufficient enough. All things happen by themselves.
I have a question around the statement that is for this clubhouse. So this, if the sincere need guidance, it tends to come. How does this play into age? And for those that are, let's say, entering society and becoming and realizing what their full potential is, how can they balance the overwhelming response that they get from society in betrayal and fitting in with this innocence that comes from being young?
Well, I don't understand what you mean by balance. Um, there's no need to have equal parts poison. Poison shouldn't play a part at all. So society is pure poison. So when one is entering society, um, the one of the most powerful things is for a human being to become wise when they're young. The combination of wisdom and youth is an absolutely unbeatable combination, because it is so profoundly rare. I mean, wisdom is rare in old age as well, but in youth particularly so, because the youth are swallowed whole by society. Um, and so if one is able to expose themselves to truth at a young age, then they will over time develop a natural armor against society.
How can one put themselves in a situation where they can expose themselves to this kind of truth? What are ways that would benefit those that are entering society specifically to this notion?
By reading my work.
I had a question on controlling the mind, I guess transcending the mind. Is breath a tool to...
No, it's all false. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I understand words take you away from the truth, and trying to be intellectual does the same thing. That makes it hard to ask a question, but I will try. You mentioned earlier in one of the previous sessions that really good art doesn't have an audience. I'm not sure if you meant that meant that literally, but
well, I think that you're paraphrasing as a misinterpretation.
Okay.
I didn't say that really good art does not have an audience. Is that something that is art does not seek one.
Okay. But if you equate that to truth somehow, why won't it attract humans to itself if it is so liberating?
Well, I didn't. That's what I just said. It didn't seek the audience.
Okay.
You're the one who said it doesn't have an audience. I didn't say that it wouldn't have an audience. It may not.
Okay.
But the artist who is creating the art, if his art is pure, he is not looking for the audience to pat him on the back.
Yes. Okay.
How can you not be trapped within your own mind?
You have no choice but to be trapped until you understand the truth.
During times of suffering and in places like hospitals, value decreases. But when I come back, to society, value again. I give value to words, other people's reactions, things. Why does value come back?
Because society is the only thing that you have known for your entire life.
By virtue of like the experiences in my life, I've come to the conclusion naturally that society is filled with people that want to sell snake oil, like tricksters. And I've come to a point where I'm genuinely afraid that I'll lose a lot of my youthful years following more untruths, and I genuinely seek more of the truth. Would like the best exposure to the truth be to expose myself to more of your readings, or?
Yeah, I as much as I dislike saying it, the answer to your question is yes. I mean, there's so much material out there that I have put out from Direct Truth podcast, the private discourses, to the discourses on the website, to the podcasts that are available to the public, and it is not. I don't like the fact that I tell people to read my works. I never do. I don't have any interest in someone reading my work. I honestly don't care, and I receive. I don't know how many emails per week. I stopped counting. And I get pages and pages of letters from human beings telling me that they've transformed after reading the work. And if I'm perfectly honest, it doesn't really do anything for me. So I don't really have any interest in telling anyone to read my books. And in fact, I might even remove the books one day. I just don't care. But I must answer the question in the most objective um, and plain-faced way that I can, and say, yes, my work is going to be the only exposure that you have for truth. Uh, I not, and there probably is somebody at 27,000 feet in the Himalayas um, who absolutely is is a uh, an individual who knows the ultimate truths about everything. But with the exception of that, uh, I've never found it. And quite frankly, if it existed, the first person in line would be me reading that work, wherever it may be. I'd be the first person in that line, buying the podcast, um, reading the work. There would be no one ahead of me to discover if somebody out there, if John Cooper or Bill Smith, whoever there may be out there, who is writing about pure truth, I'd be the first person in that line, because there is nothing in my life that is more fundamental at the central core of my existence than the truth.
What individuals throughout history have influenced your thinking or exposed you to truth?
Nobody. You have people like Jesus Christ and Buddha who themselves found truths, but their writings are utterly meaningless. Their writings have been around for thousands of years, and I've read them, and they do nothing for me. And they haven't done anything for anybody else either, because they're prescriptive. They're do this and they don't do that, and they've totally ruined the whole show. So Buddha should never have written anything. And if he was going to write something, it should have been purely and plainly for the sincere individual. Anything that is written for the masses to make the masses understand is complete just garbage. It, all of all of the truth from it has been siphoned out. It has been reduced to bare bones and skeletal. Therefore, it's just cocktail party conversation. And this is what must be understood, is that human beings are interested in reaching the masses. They're interested in having followings. They're interested in having you understand and believe and to imbibe and to have an angle to convince you. And they don't want to convince you of anything that's wrong or that they think is bad for you. They're not evil people. But the very fact that they have an angle that they want you to believe something itself is false. And the very fact that something is meant for the lowest common denominator makes the thing not worthy of consumption by anyone with a bone of sincerity in their body.
Looking at your work and seeing how for me, a $500 course on confidence is inaccessible to me. What choices do I have, and how do I arrive at
Well, I've put the fact that you're talking to me right now is one thing. Number two, I don't know how much material is out there that is available to the public out there. Um, so I've put so much out there that is not associated with any kind of fee. Uh, if you wish, if it moves you, you can explore that. Not that you should.
Assuming I'm doing something and I want to, explore it deeper, and there's another individual who I believe understands that thing deeper, is it that the guidance will come not because I'm going to go and then ask that person to teach me them, because that would then be a prescription they would apply, from their own experience, but it will actually be my sincerity in trying to deeply understand the thing that will lead to the answer coming versus being given. Is that a fair
Yes, that's
understanding?
that's in the proper direction. Yes.
Is the truth different for everyone?
No, there are some universal truths. Well, what must be understood is that every single situation, every single circumstance has a truth.
How do you know when you're free of your mind?
There's no point in asking that question because you're nowhere near it.
So I'm actually an investor. I invest in the equity markets and the secondary markets, and I know you've worked with some great investors who you count as your private clients. So I was wondering, like, is money, what is the truth behind the great investors? Is it like what I feel is it's reading a lot into the subject matter, and that is a big part of this craft. um so what have
Well, it
you
depends
observed?
what you mean by reading a lot.
So if it's about analyzing a company, it's just reading as much as possible about the company, about the industry, um to be able to make a
There's no real characteristics that you can take from other people. I think that's a fraudulent really behavior that doesn't go anywhere, to
but
copy the characteristics of other people.
not copy, but are there some indivisible truths that you have observed maybe about investing, not necessarily about the investors, but just
There
in
is no
your
such
time?
thing. There is no such thing as investing.
Okay, can you explain a little more on that?
It's just a detail. The human being who seeks the truth in whatever it is that he or she is doing. There's no truth that's separate for so-called investing. That's a man-made concept. That doesn't exist in nature. So there's no truth for that versus something else. The human being will always seek prescriptions. He will always seek how-tos. He will always try to find what the other people are doing who are doing it well and try to copy them. None of those things are truth. So it is about finding the truth in whatever one's craft is, as opposed to trying to find a better way of doing it.
Could the idea of seeking truth by itself be an abstraction that creates?
Yes. If one considers seeking truth because it's good for you or proper or correct or whatever it may be, that's just another way to gain pleasure. Absolutely, one can prescriptionize it.
I understand that transcending the mind, there is no how-to for that. I understand that. One thing that I've sort of noticed though these past weeks after reading your work and all that, one thing I've noticed is that virtually every action that I do in the day, whether it's checking emails or going for walks or anything, uh, I'm doing them almost unconsciously, as if I don't even know that I'm doing them. And then recently though, I'm starting to be conscious of that, not because I'm trying to. It's just that I sort of can see, okay, you know what, I am doing so and so activity or whatever. Anyway, my question is this: is sort of understanding that most of our actions are done unconsciously, and then even and just seeing that, is that sort of a good starting point to one day transcending the mind?
Sure, anything that involves um, an an actual realization of something that had no prescription that preceded it, um, moves in the direction of truth. Yes.
My question, I asked a question earlier. I think I mentioned that if one were, I say if one, I'm stating I do. I don't expect you to believe me, but if I claim to have sight and have cleansed myself from prescriptions, I asked a question a week ago, and I asked, is the mind preventing me from going after something I desire? So, and you said, no, the mind is making you believe that it's in your way. Um, and I guess I gave the example of A specific example is I wanted to discover truth about a specific situation or thing I'm going through, and I start to think about it, and I start to gain some sort of clarity. But my mind actively, I've noticed,
If
prevents
you
me from
truly
thinking.
attained what you profess to have attained,
Yeah.
then you would not be asking the questions that you're asking. You are
Why?
under a flawed concept that you have attained what you have attained, and you have not. And it isn't a good thing or a bad thing. And it has nothing to do with me believing you or not believing you. But you are so rabid in your belief that you have attained it that it's causing you nothing but consternation.
Is examining pain a way to find the truth?
It tends to end up being prescriptive because you can examine one pain and then another pain will follow and you'll just keep examining forever. So it tends to move in circles. But I mean, I guess it could be superior to trying to get rid of pain, but it, it, it tends not to go anywhere.
So there's a lot of content about how to tame the mind, how to conquer the mind, all the things that go against the mind. So my question is, and it may sound counterintuitive, but would total submission without resistance to the mind absolve you of the mind, or does that just breed recklessness?
No, it won't, because you're doing it for an ulterior motive. Therefore, the mind will see right through you.
Is suffering a fantasy?
Do you have suffering?
Yes.
Is it a fantasy?
I don't know.
Do you feel pain?
Mental pain, yes.
Is it fantastical pain?
No.
There's your answer.
Let's say you're trying to pursue something courageous that's different from your peers. How do you have the courage to
There's no how
pursue
do you
that?
have the courage. I mean, there's no store that you can go buy courage. I mean, um, that doesn't go anywhere.
My question is, why do flow states become so difficult to reach?
All that you chase is impossible to reach.
I'm curious if you've ever needed guidance and if you received it.
From God Himself, not a human being.
I have a question because I know that you're very particular with your words and they're not always aligned with the dictionary definition. Um, so when you speak of sincerity and devotion, um, can you explain in your understanding what do you mean by that?
Something that is genuine, that it is not an ulterior motive, that it isn't a chase, that it isn't done for cosmetic purposes, but it is because of a genuine, true, deep longing. That's the general direction in which it is. Beyond that, it's very difficult to explain.
So my question is, about chases. When we feeling or chase anything, is it untrue because by chasing something we're only reinforcing the fact that we don't have it, and that even if we do chase a feeling, those feelings are just fleeting?
I don't understand the question.
So just if when we're chasing something, it's just by chasing that thing we're sort of reinforcing the fact that we're devoid of it in the present moment, and that even if we do achieve a feeling that those feelings are impermanent and only fleeting.
Yes, therefore, so what?
No, I just wondering the truth behind why all chases fail. That's my question in essence, I guess.
I think it really depends upon how you truly feel about chases. I will reveal one thing to you. Just because you understand the English language does not mean that you understand what I say. There will be things that I say to you that will go completely over your head. They will sound innocent, and you will appear that you understood, but you really haven't, and I will not explain.
My question is, what is?
I'm sorry?
My question is, what is?
I honestly do not think that you're ready for any of these answers. These are all questions at arm's length. They're general, they're spiritual, they have no meaning. They're not going to do anything for you or anybody else.
Does physical fitness help to understand or seek the truth?
No.
Why'd you block me on Twitter, you fucking pussy?
So what you're witnessing here is exactly what you talk about in society. You have the filler of society who have nothing else to do with their time but to troll people and to use bad language. This is exactly the product of what you see in the world, in society. Just filler.
Thank you.
In your writings, you talk about not chasing things, but that a master actually creates the circumstances that a result arises by itself. Do you do that by seeking the core truths about a situation, or is there any way to do it? And another thing to ask here is, when I sit and try to think about a topic and to find truths about a topic, there is this fear in me that says, is there a way for you to find every piece of truth in this topic? How do you know you find the number one truth or whatever, the most important truth about a
Well,
topic?
you will
Thank
know
you.
you found the truth when it is effective and it is lasting, because the truth is the only thing that works.
Is time and truths are correlated, or you will experience the truth uh, as soon how they map in the one's life?
No, there's no guarantee that people will experience truth. In fact, the vast majority will not. And that is not because they are unlucky. That is because, for whatever reason, they are not devoted to it.
Is there a physical location within the body for the mind? Is that the brain, or is that, I guess, is the mind at a certain location in the body, or is that like a, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, and I would say the question is largely irrelevant because it doesn't matter. What if it was in the leg? How would that affect anything?
The more I realize the truth, the more I understand that there's nothing that I want more than freedom from my mind. That just is becoming more and more clear by the day. However, what I am now struggling with is that I'm seeing that everything that I've chased over the last few years, everything that I've pursued from my career, has not been what I actually wanted to do. It was just, going around in circles. So I'm not asking for what to do. I'm just hoping that you can expand on what the path to identifying where I truly want to go looks like,
So it is a
or how that can
systematic.
go.
It is a systematic and exposure to truth. I mean, the individuals who ultimately find the truth do so after years of exposure to the absolute truth, and that transforms the individual from within. There is nothing that anybody can consciously or intentionally do, or any action or activity.
How does one validate instincts?
I think the first thing to understand is that all the things that you call instincts are hidden under conditioning.
You bask in the truth alone. I feel like a lot of us are getting that down, but then going out into the world and having enough juggernaut energy to bring that into the world, that's where the struggle is
Well, what do you mean by bringing it into the world?
being the truth as opposed to feeling it when I'm alone, as opposed to then going out into the world and getting all of the world on me, is the compulsion.
Well, if one understands the truth, that he will more easily understand what is a lie. And so the person who understands the truth can walk through lies and not be touched by them because he recognizes them as lies. The individual who is affected by them is the person who believes that lies are truths.
All right. So just if I want to be that, or I feel compelled to be that in the world, then do that. And if not, just be it by myself.
Yeah, those are all prescriptions. I can't answer any of that stuff. It doesn't do anything. I could say yes to you, it wouldn't do anything for you.
Is there anything more after the emptiness of mind in truth seeking?
That has no relevance. You cannot ask about something that's in the future and you have no concept of, and then you want to ask what's after that when you don't even know what the thing is after which you are asking.
I actually experienced the arrival. I had it for around 4 days, and then I lost it. And I was wondering if you could, I don't know, maybe dig a little
All the
bit into
danger will
losing it.
come. All the danger will come to you when you try to chase it. The reason that you had it in the first place was because you weren't chasing it, and it arose organically. So whenever you chase those things, they go away from you. And quite honestly, even though you had the arrival, it doesn't really matter. The permanence of living a life of truth is the ultimate arrival. So any attempt to chase it is simply a pleasure chase.
As a seeker, can I rely on my intuition as a guidance?
No, because your intuition is hidden under miles and miles of conditioning. So your native intuition, yes, but you will have to get past your conditioning in order to access that native intuition.
In these tough times, COVID, we are becoming more of self-centered and trying to just take care of ourselves and not doing much for the community, and that also
You're very new here. You're very new here. Therefore, my words are not going to mean anything to you. They're just going to be French. I may as well be speaking to you in French. Community has no meaning. There is no use in doing things for other people. This entire thing of doing for others and doing for the community is complete nonsense. At the end of the day, the only person is you. It is all about wisdom and wisdom inside of you. And none of that stuff is going to make sense to you. It was all meaningless and you're not ready for it. So there's no point in going forward.
Do you believe there's any utility in seeking the guidance or seeking guidance from others? Or do you think that has to come from within?
Well, even within is another because you're conditioned. So even when you look within, you're going to hear the voices of quote others because others live inside of you. So it isn't even within. It's only available in the truth.
So does living alone help remove this conditioning that you're talking about?
No, it's not going to, because the vein in which you were asking it is a vein of which, okay, well, if I have a trick in which I live alone, will that work? And the answer is no, because you have an ulterior motive. It's had nothing. You could live in the middle of Main Street, and if you didn't imbibe or have any interest in society, then you wouldn't be affected by it. So that would be truth as well. So it has nothing to do with the physical removal of yourself. It has everything to do with how much you value society and the world.
How do you balance living in the world?
There is no balance.
And,
There's no balance, and there's no reason to balance living in the world because the world is complete false. Everything in the world is false. It doesn't mean that you have to leave the world, but anything in the world and everything in the society is false. Therefore, it has no place in the life of a sincere individual. It has no parts. There's no poison that's part of the balance. You don't balance poison with anything else. Poison is just pure poison.
What role does service play?
Nothing in the vein that you're asking about it. You're coming at it from the standpoint of spirituality and compassion and goodness and service, and it's all meaningless. That has no meaning. It is all ego-based, and you're doing it because to make yourself feel better, and therefore it has no relevance. Things that arise as a natural consequence are fine. Things that arise as a direct attempt to achieve and to do are false.
What about in terms of self-discovery through service?
You're reaching. You're trying to use all different kinds of words because you are addicted to the idea of spiritual concepts and goodness and kindness and all that stuff. And it's not a good or a bad thing, but you're just going to keep trying to maneuver the words into the direction of that. That's where your heart really is, and that's fine.
I wanted to know if sincerity shows up because of one's intensity, or it gets cultivated on its own without any how question.
I don't know where sincerity comes from, but generally, when an individual is sincere, then they begin to see things, they begin to seek things for the purposes of seeking for the thing itself, as opposed to doing it for an ulterior motive. But where exactly it comes from and why it comes to a particular human being in a particular domain versus another, I don't know. But I guess it can be cultivated if one realizes that without it, there's no chance to achieve any truth.
Yeah, so my situation is that like I'm stuck in a job I hate doing, and I'm just trying to get the financial independence I can to escape it. But like I've tried, everything I can think of, trading stocks, starting a business, and nothing works. I found your work about a year ago. It hasn't helped me. I'm still stuck in the same situation, and it just feels like whatever thing I do is just like another wrong step. So I mean, I don't know if like what to do at this point.
I can't tell you what to do.
What can I do that can help me like solve my problem?
You're asking the same question again. I can't tell you what to do. When a human being decides to truly get somewhere, he genuinely does.
With this pandemic situation, I recently experienced a loss of 2 close family members. It's a tangible pain. And how do you cope with that grief? I'm not worried about my own
there's
death,
no way
but
that I can tell you how to cope with the grief. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear that. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. As to what you can do to lessen the pain, these things tend to run their course, and there's really no one who can alleviate that for you. There's nothing that anybody can say that to try to make you feel better or cheer you up, because these are visceral, real, tragic things that affect the life of a human being. And to try to diminish that in any way would actually be to trivialize what you have actually gone through. So I would not recommend trying to trivialize it, to try to make yourself feel better, or try to feel worse, or whatever it may be. It is the gravity of the tragedy is the gravity of the tragedy, and there's really no getting around it.
thank you. This means a lot. I appreciate it.
Sure. Good night.